To explore the president's speech and its implication, joining us via Zoom is a lawyer, a lecturer, and a public affairs commentator, Professor Derin Ologbenla, Head of Political Science Department, University of Lagos. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
All right, Professor, world leaders always give speech and we're used to them. What made this particular speech so significant that the world is talking about?
Well, thank God for President Muhammadu Buhari's opportunity to speak at the United Nations General Assembly. The best thing that has happened to the president is that as a military head of state, he never had the opportunity, but now as a civilian head of state, he was given the opportunity once before and now the second time. So he more or less had the opportunity twice now. And it's like his farewell speech.
Yes, it is.
To the United Nations. And it was a great one because it covered all the relevant fields. And I must say that the writers of the speech for Mr. President did a good job.
Thank you very much, Professor. I'm going to ask, the president talked on a number of issues very specifically. One of them was climate change, and he's been quite consistent in this particular area. How do you think this speech was received? These issues he raised on climate change, how do you think they were received, and what impact do you think they would have going forward?
Well, the part of this on the climate change was very, very interesting, but the president did not make a demand from the developed industrialized world. No, they create the the depletion of the ozone layers because of the industrialization and pollution of the hemisphere, and consequently, any African leader, Asian leader, or Latin American leader should actually comment on what is going on, but make a demand. And that demand is simply this, that they cause the problem,
yes,
and they should assist the developing countries.
But Professor, if I might, the president, sorry to interject, the president actually did a request. He's made this request before, that there were financial commitments that were promised to be given if Africa comes on board the climate action.
Fulfilled.
Yes, but he did mention that. He did mention them in his speech.
Yes, the demand must continue to be made.
Yes.
You understand me? Anybody from the developing countries who want to comment on climate change must actually, at the end of his speech, make a demand. That demand should be coordinated throughout the third world countries or developing countries.
All right, that's good. In his, like he mentioned in his request, he did also mention that this financial aid that was promised, because of the fact that a lot of the damage of climate change is caused by the more industrialized nations, and a lot of the damage, the sufferings, is going to be suffered by Africans and less industrialized nations. And he's asked, once again, this is not the first time he's made this request, that the promises that were made in billions of dollars to be able to help Africa transit to a zero carbon economy make it possible. Now, he's made this request before. Do you think the West is listening? Do you think the more industrialized nations of this world, who think more about themselves and profits and all of that, do you think this would make some impact, or at least give another administration or other African countries leverage to be able to push this argument one step further?
Yes, thank you very much. You know, South Africa was not present at that meeting.
Yes.
Because Ramaphosa had to return to South Africa because of the crisis in energy supply there.
Yeah.
So it was now an opportunity for our president, as a leader coming from the African continent or Black Africa, to actually continue to make demands on the West,
Okay.
The West and China, they are very selfish. The industrialization process have created the problem for the whole world, or the problem of climate change. And the effect is devastating. You can see what had just happened in Pakistan. You
Yes.
see what is happening in northern Nigeria, whereby the flooding in the Taraba state, Adamawa state, and so on and so forth. And it's going to continue like this if they don't assist us when these things happen. And that is why the West, along with China and even Russia, they are all involved in this depletion of the ozone layer and the consequent change in the climate. We must continue to make demands on them.
If I might ask, can't we take the African continent and African leaders, can't we put ourselves in a better bargaining position? So we're making demands, or else we tie some of these actions to some of the resources and facilities that the West enjoys in African countries. So we don't sound as if we're begging for help, but we are insistent that if you want to do business in Africa, you are going to have to meet these conditions to be able to ameliorate some of the problems that you cause. Can we generally, not speaking about the president now, but generally as African leaders, can't we put a stronger foot forward collectively?
Yes, we can, through the African Union. We can. But what has happened in the past is that some African leaders are always in cahoot with France, or with United States, or with Germany, or with Britain. They always fractionalize themselves. And the consequence of that is that they don't take us serious enough. And that is why we have not been able to get all the money promised to assist us in, I would say, ameliorating the natural disasters that we are suffering now. Because apart from earthquake, the drought in the Sahel and many parts of Africa, all the way to Zimbabwe, is causing a lot of anxiety because food prices are going up, and a lot of people are going to starve if there is no assistance coming from the industrialized countries, especially the European Union and the Americans and the Chinese. We have to put our house in order, like you said, but through the African Union.
Fantastic. We're going to shift the course of our conversation to something else he talked about, which was a major issue, and it resounded across the globe. He spoke about tenure democracy, protecting democracy. And one of the things he mentioned was tenure elongation and the negative ripple effect it causes, and how this is not going to be allowed to continue. What his administration and Nigeria as a country has done to support and to support democracies and to reduce this issue of unjust tenure elongation, forceful tenure elongation. How do you think, what message do you think this is sending across the African continent as we speak?
Well, I think it's a very good part of the speech, emphasizing the role of democracy in Africa and the growing number of, I would say, elongation of tenure by some African leaders. You remember there was an attempt, to overthrow governments in Guinea.
Yes.
And Nigeria sent message to them that we are coming. And just the mere fact that we say we are coming, more or less stop them from, effecting that coup and that change of violence, government violence. The consequence of that is that we in the West African zone, Nigeria and Ghana in particular, have taken the lead in stopping military takeover. But in some part of West Africa, like Mali and some other places, these military fellows, they are waiting in the barracks to see how well the democratic government will perform, and if they're not performing, they will seek the opportunity to take over government. So it's both ways. Governance must be done properly. Democracy must be pursued with building institutions. not just talking about it. We need to build institutions that will sustain the democracy that we are practicing. There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Egypt was democratically elected, but the military came in and sent them to jail.
Yes, they did.
And took over government and legitimized themselves in power. And since Egypt, Assisi, there have been several attempts in doing the same thing in other parts of Africa. And we must always say this.
Yes.
The
So
Buhari government has done well in promoting democracy in Nigeria.
indeed he has. Indeed he has. He's spoken quite frankly about it. Now, taking that a step further, he also mentioned about his desire that one of his legacies is going to be free and fair elections to be held, and so he can hand over to someone new in a process that is credible and people are going to be able to trust. Now, this is a very big statement made at a very big occasion with the world watching. This is a commitment. Is this going to be a commitment that we have seen at least the last election here in Nigeria? How far is this going to go in Africa, in Nigeria and in Africa, this commitment that the president has made?
Well, the commitment is good in the sense that we have an INEC, the Independent National Electoral Commission, that is working hard, backed by law, that is the Electoral Act as amended in 2022, to give us a free, fair electoral process. And the INEC, they are working in conjunction with government, NGOs, and there will be a free and fair election. The only problem is that some part of the country are insecure at the moment and they are unstable. Northeast, some of the Northwest, some of the North Central, some of the Eastern states. These are the facts and the challenges that face the government. So the government might want a free and fair election, but the people must work for free and fair election also. It's not just government alone. And when we look at it in terms of Africa, free and fair election is a luxury in some of these African countries because they are so divided and so antagonistic towards one another that it doesn't go well at all. But we thank God what has happened in Kenya is a clear example as to the way other African countries should go and emulate the Kenya electoral process.
Indeed it is, and I believe that the president's stance and his comments globally would help strengthen that position and help keep some African leaders in check.
Indeed.
I'm going to move.
In the West African sub-region, I think President Buhari and his government, the APC government, are encouraging democracy to go on. But you see, having made that commitment at such an international level, the president and his team, that is the cabinet, must work hard between now and May next year to make this a reality.
All right. For a president leaving office next year, what do you consider as the turning point of that speech?
Well, the turning point of that speech is that it's a farewell speech. It touches on all the major aspects that is expected from him. The only missing point, which I've emphasized earlier on, is that at the end of the speech, I was expecting our president to make a strong demand on the West that they should do more than what they are doing or what they have done, and that they should be forthcoming with more funding to African countries, Asian countries, and Latin American countries who are suffering the consequences of climate change.
All right. Finally, sir, I'm going to ask, how do you think President Muhammadu Buhari will be remembered in Africa and global leadership? What type of a person or leader do you think he will be remembered as?
Well, number one, he is a forthright leader, and he has been I will say, a team player in the sense that he has cooperated with other African heads of states, and he has gone to AU meetings on many occasions, and he has been able to make friends with other African heads of states. That is making Nigeria to be acceptable to other African heads of states or African states. That's number one. Number two, he will be remembered in the Nigerian context as the man who actually faced Boko Haram and decimated them to an extent that Boko Haram is not as vicious as before, because 2015, we were all afraid that these people are going to march on Abuja and take over the whole country. So he has done very well in terms of facing Boko Haram. But other insecurities have also come up, but they are being tackled, like these Fulani herders, farmers herders clashes, but there has been increase in kidnapping in the southeast, southwest, south, and also in the north. You know, these are multiple challenges that the president has done as much as he could to face. The only thing is that, you see, the people who are doing the kidnapping are fellow Nigerians. The people who are doing the rustling, cattle rustling, and stealing of other people's farm produce, they are fellow Nigerians. So he has not ruthlessly go after them as he should. But you see, he has given instruction to the military, and the military are also doing their best.
All right,
So
thank you very much.
Thank
you very much, Professor. It's been a pleasure having you on the show discussing this matter, and thank you for your wealth of knowledge and insight you have shared.